I'm a 29-year-old woman, and for the past 2 years, I've been dating a guy named Derek. He's 32, works as a civil engineer, and he's one of those people who always seems calm and collected. We met at a conference mixer, exchanged cards, and he emailed me the next morning with a one-liner that made me laugh. Things started off easy. Clean, drama-free. He was never controlling, always respectful. That part never changed. I work as a corporate event manager. Long hours, high expectations, tight deadlines, basically chaos and heels. I'm good at what I do. Organizing high-end product launches, managing brand showcases, making sure people with egos twice the size of the venue are still smiling by dessert. My work life is polished, efficient. But cooking? That's not me. Never has been. It's not that I hate it, it's just never been something I've cared about. I order in, I reheat, I survive. I've never felt less feminine because of it. Things started to feel weird the first time I met Derek's family. His parents live about 40 minutes out, small-town suburb energy. They hosted a Sunday brunch a few months into us dating. Eggs, pastries, mini fruit cups, the usual spread. His mom, Joanne, greeted me with that kind of smile where it's just teeth. 10 minutes into sitting down, she asked, "So, Camille, do you cook for my son or just let the microwave do all the work?" Then she laughed like it was the funniest thing she'd ever said. I smiled, said something like, "He survives," and waited for Derek to cut in. He didn't, just reached for the butter. I brought it up later in the car. His exact words, "That's just how they are." They joke like that with everyone. So I let it go. I figured it was nerves or outdated humor, but it didn't stop there. Every time we saw them after that, the comments kept coming. Lightly sugared but sharp. Someone joked that my oven must be pristine from lack of use. At Christmas, Derek's aunt gave me a cookbook with a post-it on a specific page. Start here. Someone else made a joke about apron sizes and how some girls just aren't cut out for homemaking. I wish I could say it came from one person, but it bounced between them like a group routine. Derek would either pretend he didn't hear it, or he'd chuckle nervously and move the conversation forward. It got to a point where I started tracking the clock to see how long I could go at any family event before a remark came in. Derek's defense always stayed the same. They don't mean anything by it. But silence can mean just as much. Then there was that one night, I'll never forget it. We were staying over at his parents' place. I went to grab something from the living room. They didn't know I was walking in. His mom, one of the aunts, and his cousin were sitting with wine glasses, talking low, and I heard it. She's just not wife material. Pretty girl, but not someone you build a home with. Then silence when they saw me standing in the doorway. Wide eyes. Awkward smiles. I didn't say a word. I just turned around. Even then, I didn't cause a scene. I told myself they weren't worth it. But then came my birthday dinner. Derek's cousin raised a glass halfway through the night and said, "To Camille, who may not cook, but at least she orders well." Everyone laughed. Derek included. I didn't. I excused myself, walked into the restaurant bathroom, and locked the door. Stayed in there for 10 minutes. Not crying. Just sitting on the toilet lid, listening to the faucet drip. Something broke that night. I wasn't sad I was done. Not just with the comments, but with how small I felt every time I let them pass. Walking away from the relationship would have been easy. Blocking their numbers, ghosting every invite, starting fresh. But there was a part of me that didn't want to leave quietly. Not to win, not to teach them a lesson, just to show them what they missed while they were busy laughing. I called Alyssa the next morning. She's a private chef I worked with for a high-profile gala last year. She owed me a favor. I didn't tell her everything, just that I needed help pulling off a 5-course dinner that looked and tasted like art, and that I needed it hosted in my apartment. She said yes before I finished the sentence. I spent the next week planning. Not out of spite, out of precision. There would be candles, real glassware, custom menus, a full staging transformation. Every chair would have a name card. Every detail would say, "This wasn't an accident." I told Derek I was planning a dinner, called it a celebration of togetherness. He was thrilled, thought I was finally trying to connect with his family on their terms. I thought I was making an effort, and I was. Just not the kind he assumed. By the time the invites were sent and the rentals were confirmed, I had one thought on repeat in my head: they want wife material. Fine. Let's set the table. The invitations were printed on heavy cardstock with gold foil lettering, no group texts, no emails, nothing casual. I sent them through the mail, addressed by hand, each one sealed in a cream envelope with a wax stamp on the back. The header read, "A celebration of togetherness, Saturday 7 p.m., hosted by Camille." No explanation. No menu preview. Just an RSVP line and a dress code, cocktail attire preferred. Derek's mother called within hours. She asked if it was for an engagement. I told her it wasn't. She asked if it was for a birthday, an announcement, anything specific. I said it was just an evening to connect and enjoy each other's company. That was it. Derek's aunts texted too, one after the other, fishing for details. I gave the same response each time. Derek came home that night holding the invitation in both hands like it was an award. He said he was proud of me for putting in the effort, for bridging the gap. I nodded, handed him a glass of wine, and changed the subject. Let him believe what he needed to believe. Alyssa and I met the next morning at a small cafe downtown. We had a timeline, a layout sketch, and a list of 5 dishes taped to the table. The plan was to prep everything fresh, but played it live. I would be visible the whole time front and center, but coach through each step. Alyssa would handle the complicated parts in the background, then fade into the role of a quiet helper. A sommelier friend of hers, Matt, agreed to join in too. He'd explain the wine pairings after each course, dressed in a tailored black vest and bootie, speaking with just enough flair to distract the guests while we reset for the next round. I rented dining chairs with navy velvet cushions and borrowed a 12-foot wooden table from an event supplier I'd worked with last year. The lighting guy from one of my product launches offered to help for free. He owed me a favor after I bailed him out with a broken microphone 5 minutes before a CEO speech. We swapped out all the overheads in my apartment for Amber Edison bulbs and tucked small LED floor uplights behind the curtains to give the room a soft, golden glow. A team from a local plant shop delivered potted olive trees and clusters of eucalyptus in matte ceramic vases. I picked out ceramic dinnerware that looked handmade but matched perfectly, and thick linen napkins that took me an hour to fold evenly. The menus sat at each place setting, cream cardstock with the title, "An Evening Curated by Camille." There were no dish descriptions, just course numbers. A little mystery always works better than a full reveal. I spent the next 3 nights walking through every moment: how I'd greet them at the door, when the champagne would be handed out, how I'd introduce the courses, where to pause for questions. I practiced holding the plating tongs in the mirror, rehearsed my smile, tried different ways of presenting the lemon zest without looking like I was trying too hard. I found the jumpsuit 2 days before the dinner. Deep navy, sharp shoulders, wide legs, open back. Clean lines, no frills. I booked a last-minute hair appointment the morning of and asked for a low twist with no loose strands. But my nails were bare except for clear polish. The point wasn't to look like someone I wasn't, it was to look unshakable. At the entrance, I hung a long sheet of burlap fabric and clipped it with string lights across a simple wooden frame. Above it, a hand-painted sign read, "Built from scratch." I bought a Polaroid camera and set up a little table with markers. Every guest would take a photo and write their name underneath it before walking in. Derek asked twice if I wanted help. I told him I had it covered. He offered again when the table arrived. I shook my head. This was mine, all of it. By Friday night, the apartment didn't look like a place anyone lived in. It looked like a private supper club. The couch had been moved to the bedroom. The rug was swapped out. The counter was spotless. Alyssa arrived late in the evening with crates of produce and protein wrapped in butcher paper. We arranged everything in the kitchen, labeled by course. The fridge was packed to the brim. Bottles of wine sat lined up in chilling sleeves. I pulled out my notebook and made one last list. Every comment, every side eye, every backhanded compliment I could remember from the last 2 years. I wrote them down as bullet points and matched them to the dishes. One per course. A silent pairing. An invisible toast to every dig I had smiled through. At midnight, I stood in the middle of the room and walked through it one last time. From the door, to the table, to the plating station, to the window, back to the door. No hesitations, no nerves, just the timeline running through my head like clockwork. The last thing I did before going to bed was look in the mirror. I didn't psych myself up. I didn't whisper affirmations. I just smiled once, small, sharp, calm. Let them taste everything they assumed I couldn't be. By 6:45, the candles were lit. The playlist was humming low with jazz guitar, and everything smelled faintly of lemon and charred rosemary. The front table held rows of champagne flutes, filled just enough to catch the light. Plates were stacked with precision. The kitchen was quiet, but the air buzzed like the moment before curtains go up. The doorbell rang at 6:58. Derek's parents arrived first. His mom wore a pearl gray blazer. His dad had a sweater draped over his shoulders like it was country club uniform. They stepped inside and paused. Their eyes moved across the room, the wooden table set with polished flatware, folded linen napkins, glass carafes glowing from the underlighting. Joanne's expression didn't change, but her hand tightened slightly on her clutch. Derek greeted them casually and moved toward the drinks. The aunts came next, followed by 2 cousins, then his sister and her boyfriend. Each one stepped into the apartment and slowed down, like they weren't sure where they were. The eucalyptus, the dimmed bulbs, the flicker of glass and polished wood, it caught them off guard. The sommelier handed out champagne without introducing himself. He just smiled and let the room adjust. I greeted everyone one by one, holding steady eye contact, a slight nod with each name. The Polaroid wall stood just inside the entrance. They lined up for pictures without asking questions. The sign, "Built from scratch," did all the talking. Each photo was clipped to the board with a small wooden peg. By the time the last guest arrived, the wall looked like a family collage from a wedding, but colder. At 7:10, I stepped into the middle of the room and gave a short welcome. Thanked everyone for coming, said I wanted to host something that felt intentional. That was the word I used, intentional. Then I disappeared into the kitchen and nodded once to Alyssa. The first course was scalloped ceviche, served in shallow white bowls with a small strip of citrus peel and microgreens. I carried 2 at a time, placing them in front of each guest without a stumble. Once everyone had theirs, I stood at the head of the table and explained the balance: lime orange, sea salt, chili oil, just enough brine to wake the palate. Nobody asked questions. They just looked at the plates. Joanne's sister leaned in and whispered something to the woman beside her. I caught only the last word, magazine. The second course came 20 minutes later, beet ravioli filled with whipped walnut cream, garnished with sage butter and shaved parmesan. Alyssa handed me the plates, one at a time. I set them down while thanking her by name, voice low but clear, then turned to explain the dish. Someone asked how long it took. I said it was a long day but worth every second. Alyssa stayed quiet, letting the illusion hold. Joanne's tone got sweeter as the night went on. Too sweet. She asked more questions than usual, complimented the flowers, the napkins, even the playlist. Her fork moved slowly. Her smile never reached her eyes. By the third course, duck breast with blackberry glaze on a celery root puree, one of the cousins pulled out her phone and started recording. I didn't stop her. That wasn't the kind of night this was. I leaned slightly toward her as I explained the technique. Reverse sear, resting, light glaze, serve warm, not hot. She laughed and said I sounded like I'd done this before. Someone asked how long I'd been cooking like this. I paused for just a second and said, just long enough to prove a point. No one laughed. The dessert came last. Lemon tart with brulee basil crust, torched at the table. The flame snapped quietly in the room as I moved around with the handheld torch, finishing each tart one by one. Nobody was talking now. Even Derek stayed quiet. The flame reflected off wine glasses. The heat made the basil crisp and fragrant. I set my own plate down, lifted my glass, and looked across the table. They said I wasn't wife material, I said. So I curated a menu they'll remember longer than any insult. Silence. For 5 full seconds. Then a few glasses lifted. Some clinked. Others didn't move. Joanne stared at her plate. Derek laughed once, short and awkward, and looked around the table like someone was supposed to back him up. I added one last thing before taking a bite of my tart. I hope it was seasoned just right. No one answered. When it was over, I didn't lift a plate. The catering staff stepped in, 2 people in black uniforms, who started clearing dishes and pouring coffee like they'd been part of the plan all along. I thanked each guest with a nod as they gathered their coats. No hugs. No small talk at the door. The last people to leave were Derek's parents. His dad gave a tight smile. Joanne didn't say anything. Derek stood beside me as the door closed behind them. He looked proud. Confused, but proud. Like he'd just watched a magic trick and didn't quite get how it worked. He said something under his breath about how the night went better than he expected. I didn't answer. I just turned toward the kitchen, pulled off my apron, and poured myself a glass of water. As Derek's family left that night, the thank yous came slow and tight. One of the cousins mumbled something about the duck being fancier than expected. An aunt complimented the lighting. Joanne didn't speak. She stepped around the Polaroid wall without even glancing at it and left without a handshake. Derek closed the door behind them like the host of a successful fundraiser and turned to me with a grin. He called the night perfect. Said it felt like a turning point. Gave me a hug in the kitchen, while the staff wiped down the counters behind us. I didn't say much. Just nodded and went to change out of the jumpsuit. He poured himself a second glass of wine and went to the couch. In bed, he said they'd come around, just like he knew they would. I didn't correct him. The next morning, a single text came through from one of the cousins. Well played. I deleted it without responding. By noon, the dining table was broken down, the chairs returned, the lights back to default. The apartment looked like itself again. The only sign anything had happened was a small scorch mark on the counter where the torch had flared too close. Over the next week, Derek told the story of the dinner like it was a personal win. He laughed through it on every phone call, told his coworkers about the duck, told his friends about the wine pairings. At dinner with mutual friends that Friday, he pulled out an invisible torch and mimicked how I'd bruleed the tarts. Everyone laughed. I didn't. In the car ride home, I told him that dinner wasn't a bit. He said I was overthinking it, said I needed to relax. He didn't ask why I'd gone through all that effort in the first place. He was too busy enjoying the spotlight. That night, I slept in the guest room. No argument, no big moment. I just brought my pillow in, closed the door, and let the room stay quiet. The next morning, I made a list of short-term rentals, small studios, furnished places with flexible leases. I didn't book anything that day, I just looked. But I kept the tabs open and left the browser running. Saturday came and went. I stayed home. Derek watched a game on the couch, laughed at his phone, texted in bursts. At one point, he asked if I wanted to cook together sometime, said it might be fun now. I told him I was busy. Sunday night, we ordered takeout. He brought up the dinner again, this time with a joke about how I could have just told his family I learned to cook. He said they probably all believed it now anyway. That was it, the last little thread. I didn't answer. He thought that night was about pretending to be someone else, or about making peace, about performance. But the truth was, it was the first time I stopped pretending altogether. I wasn't angry. I just finally understood what kind of story he'd been telling this whole time, and I wasn't in it the way I thought I was. I ran into Derek's aunt at the grocery store. I was near the self-checkout scanning lemons when she walked past with a small cart. She stopped just long enough to smirk and say, "Surprised you're not catering now." I scanned the last item, picked up my bag and said, "Surprised you're still talking," then walked out. That weekend, a photo popped up on social media. Derek's family had another dinner, long table, wine glasses, matching sweaters. Everyone was tagged. His sister, his cousins, even 2 of the aunts. My name was missing. Derek reposted it without noticing. I didn't ask. He didn't say anything. That night, I told him I didn't feel seen by him or respected by them. He blinked a few times and asked if I was still upset. That was it. No argument, no apology, just flat air between us. I started packing that same night, small things first. Jewelry trays, folded dresses, documents. Nothing loud. I moved with the door closed and my music low. No one noticed. By the 3rd day, Derek stood in the hallway watching me take a stack of books off the shelf. He asked if I was serious. I said I was serious the moment I stopped laughing at their jokes. He stood there like he was waiting for something else, but I went back to folding and taping the box. I signed a 3-month lease on a furnished sublet 2 neighborhoods away. Open floor plan, clean kitchen, small balcony. The landlord handed me the keys that Friday morning. I didn't give a forwarding address. I didn't owe one. A few days after I moved, a mutual friend sent me a screenshot of a group chat. Derek told people I had a meltdown over a few harmless comments. Said I stormed off after everyone finally warmed up to me. I didn't reply. I saved the screenshot and moved on. Then Alyssa called. Someone had filled out the contact form on her website pretending to be a bride planning a micro wedding. The details were vague, but the email sounded familiar. The phone number checked out. It was Derek's cousin. She'd used a fake name but kept her real area code. Alyssa ignored the messages. When the woman pushed for a call, Alyssa played dumb. She thanked her for the inquiry and said she was fully booked through the end of the year. Then she called me and told me the whole thing. I asked her not to engage again if they reached out. I went back to the old apartment once. Just once. Derek wasn't home. I walked through the door with 2 boxes, grabbed what was left, kitchen things, a jacket I'd forgotten, a plant that was barely alive. I didn't linger. I left the key on the counter with a note folded under it. The note said, "Understanding matters more than defending. You did neither." Then I left. No messages. No follow-ups. I blocked his number before I got to the elevator. That was it. No second wave. No late night calls. No flowers or letters. Just a clean exit, sealed and done. The new apartment had white walls, hardwood floors, and no photos on the shelves. The kitchen was small but clean, and the balcony faced a row of trees that blocked just enough city noise to make it feel private. I unpacked slowly, 1 room at a time. No shared drawers. No toothbrush left in someone else's space. The only sounds were traffic from below and the hum of the fridge. I never heard from Derek. I had blocked his number before I left, and nothing came through, not even a mutual friend trying to play middleman. The silence stayed unbroken. It said everything louder than words ever could. 2 weeks in, I was managing a corporate launch event at a downtown hotel. The setup was tight, red carpet, stage lighting, a branded champagne wall. About an hour into the evening, I noticed a woman standing near the dessert bar, looking around like she wasn't sure what to do next. It was Derek's sister. She wasn't on the guest list. She wore a floral dress and held a glass of rose, but never took a sip. When she spotted me across the room, she walked over like she belonged there. I nodded to one of the security team and pointed without saying anything. They approached calmly, asked for her name, then walked her out with quiet firmness. Just before she reached the exit, she leaned in and muttered, "You made us look like fools." I didn't answer. I turned back toward the stage and kept going. Later that night, I found an old journal while unpacking the last moving box. Inside was a page written 2 months before the dinner. It was full of questions, wondering if I was being too sensitive, worrying about fitting in, doubting whether I was ever going to be accepted. I closed the journal and left it at the bottom of a drawer. That version of me didn't live here anymore. A few days later, I got called into a meeting with senior leadership at work. They offered me a new position, regional director of brand partnerships. More travel, bigger clients, a full team reporting to me. I said yes before they could finish the sentence. The announcement went out the next day, and congratulations poured in from across the company. Alyssa sent me a voice note that evening. She'd picked up 3 new private clients in the last month, all referrals from people who had been at or heard about the dinner. One of them was a luxury real estate broker. Another was a couple planning an ultra-exclusive engagement party. She ended the message with, "That night was good for both of us." She also forwarded me an email she received from Derek's uncle. It was short. He admitted they had misjudged Camille and hoped Alyssa would pass that along. I didn't reply. The narrative started slipping out of Derek's control. A few of his friends, mutual ones from back when we double dated or hosted parties, began posting less filtered takes. One messaged me directly and said, "I get it now. No long explanation. Just those 4 words." By that point, the dinner had taken on a reputation. It wasn't talked about constantly, but when it came up, it stuck. People called it elegant, cold, poetic. Someone compared it to a roast without words. Someone else called it a dinner you survive, not attend. I never corrected any version. At work, a coworker named Mason started showing up just after meetings ended. Not pushy, not overdone. He lingered with small comments about menu design, campaign themes, ways to improve lighting flow. One afternoon, he asked if I wanted to join a few others for drinks. I went. He didn't hover, didn't follow up the next day, just let the moment stay casual. I left the door open. That weekend, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony. The air was cool, the sky clear, the street noise soft enough to tune out. I looked down at the city below, leaned on the railing, and smiled to myself. They said I wasn't warm enough, so I gave them ice. 6 months later, the title on my email signature read Regional Director, Brand Partnerships. I moved between cities now, New York for summits, Chicago for brand rollouts, LA for seasonal launches. The calendar stayed full, but every meeting, every booking, every trip happened on my terms. I didn't ask permission. I didn't explain my schedule. I just booked and boarded. Derek never resurfaced. No late night emails. No friend of a friend messages. Nothing showed up at my door. Every number that needed blocking stayed blocked. No slips, no echoes. Clean cut. At a networking event, someone I barely knew tried to bring him up, said they'd heard we used to date. I raised an eyebrow and answered with 2 words, "He's history." Then I turned toward the next conversation. That was the last time his name came up in public. Sometimes the dinner replayed in my head, not in a dramatic way, just clearly. I'd remember how the plates looked, the pause before the toast, the weight of the torch in my hand. It wasn't about performance. It wasn't about revenge. It was just a statement. Quiet. Final. It's in my own language. Alyssa took off like a rocket. Word of mouth from the dinner traveled fast. 2 of my former clients booked her privately, one for a vineyard anniversary, another for a wellness retreat in Napa. We partnered again once in March, this time for a curated dinner series I launched called Table by Camille. Guests were invitation only. Themes rotated monthly. I didn't cook. I never claimed to. I designed the mood, the pacing, the voice of the evening. That was always the point. Mason kept showing up. He never asked for anything. He just learned my coffee order and walked with me after meetings. He stopped sending emojis and texts and started handing me handwritten notes instead. No pressure. Just a steady presence. I let it be what it was. Nothing labeled. No roles. Just calm. At one event, someone raised a glass and joked about a sequel, asked if I was planning another statement dinner. I smiled and answered without pause. That was closure, not a franchise. No one followed up after that. I stopped adjusting my tone in meetings. I didn't laugh to soften blunt feedback. I gave deadlines and didn't fill the silence after. I didn't apologize for being direct. I didn't pretend to be less when more was required. One Saturday afternoon, I passed my old apartment while out for a walk. The building hadn't changed. Same paint, same small crack in the brick near the entrance. I stood across the street for 30 seconds, then kept moving. No pull, no memory worth revisiting. Just space I used to occupy. That was the win. It wasn't in the applause. It wasn't in the silence either. It was in how little of him remained in my new life. That night, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window. As I walked past the kitchen, I glanced at the oven. The light was off. I smirked. Still untouched. Still not needed.